So this is me on the right-hand side, in case you hadn't guessed. And Venturenomics is now a year old, but prior to that, Marika and I, who co-founded Venturenomics, started and grew and ultimately moved on from an R&D consultancy based in the UK. They are still going, active, and with a team of 20 now. So we've been working in grant funding generally, and more specifically research and development grant funding for the last 10 years or so. We started really from a renewable energy efficiency, on-site renewable energy generation theme. And over the course of the 10 years that we ran Granted, I would say at least 30% of our client base were in that renewables and energy sector. So we've kept up to date with that whole green space, if you like. But we have broadened over the years. So we have looked at more general technologies spanning health and transport and mobility and general technology. So we have a good range of knowledge now, not just in the energy space. So I'm just going to see if I can move this slide. Sorry, I'm just having a little technical trouble. So, in terms of today, I am going to run through an overview of funding and give you an idea of where grants fit into that overall funding landscape. I'm going to talk about research and development grants specifically to give you an idea of what kind of projects will qualify, and if you're not, say, an innovation-led SME, how you can still access that kind of funding. And then I'm going to share some tips, advice, some learnings that we've had over the years in writing successful applications to Innovate UK in particular, but quite a broad range of R&D grant funds. And then I've left some space at the bottom to say, is there something particular that you'd like to cover? Do you have particular questions you want me to cover off? So now would be a really good chance if we could go around the room in some kind of orderly fashion to say who you are and broadly what your organization does. And if there is anything specific you want to cover, I'll make a note of it. Who would kick us off?
Shall I just nominate someone just from the list I've got of people on the call, if that's okay?
Thanks, Cara. Yeah, that would be.
So, Stuart, why don't you start?
A short straw. Morning, everyone. So, Stuart Winterbottom from Causey Homes in Lancashire, which is basically all the local authorities in Lancashire working together to help residents who are in fuel poverty to get heating and insulation measures for the properties. Particularly interested in this event today because we have a community interest company that we use to support at Causey Homes in Lancashire. Most of the funding we secure is eco funding, and there's invariably a shortfall of funding between what's available and the cost of doing the measure. So we try to raise funds for the community interest company to help residents with that shortfall.
Mm-hmm. And is that about installing technologies?
It's installing central heating, insulation, replacement boilers, that type of thing.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Stuart.
Cheers.
Next on my list is Anna from CAT.
Hey, yeah, my name's Anna Bullen. I am based at CAT. I started at CAT in February to run their new innovation lab, which is part of the Zero Carbon Britain Hub. Zero Carbon Britain's been researching getting to net zero for the last 12 years. CAT was given a very generous donation to set up the ZCB Hub and Innovation Lab, which covers our core costs, but not a lot else. So I'm interested in this because we're going to be specifically looking at bringing in additional funding to run a series of innovation labs all around, kind of the focus being addressing the existing barriers to reaching net zero over the next 2-3 years.
Thanks,
Thank
Anna.
you. Sorry, did you have any questions, Alex?
No, that's good. Thank you. That was nice and clear.
Okay, David from eCargo Bikes next.
Okay, yep. So from eCargo Bikes, we are a final mile zero emissions logistics business focusing on urban areas. My key focus is looking at R&D funding for the transport and mobility side for the design, patenting and manufacturing of new eCargo bikes. And would like to have manufacturing plants in the UK to go to scale, and then also syndicate that manufacturing around the world.
Do you have your design for the cargo bike done and finished?
They are going through patenting at the moment. We have several designs, and that includes the bike and as well as upstream capabilities for order picking right through the supply chain.
Okay. And do you feel like you're finished with your kind of core research and development, or are there is there always more work to do in that space?
I feel that this has been, in people's heads for the last 4 years being thought about. So I think we're in a pretty good position in terms of patenting the solution, the technology around it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then it's Aga also from eCargo Bikes. Aga, do you just very quickly want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, so good morning everyone. So I work along with David and I'm actually looking after financial side of the business, but very often involvement of my input is required. So yes, as David said, we are in the process of patenting new designs and assisting with that.
Thank you, thanks. And then Joanna from Students Organising for Sustainability.
Hi, yes, I'm Joanna. So SOS is an educational charity created by students and staff in NUS. And we essentially have 3 main kind of work streams. We want to get more students leading and learning about sustainability. We want sustainability embedded in formal education throughout the learning journey, and we want to make sustainability more inclusive. Until last year, we were actually a department within NUS, so we kind of split off to kind of create our own charity last October. And about 50% of our funding at the moment is through kind of grants and funding in general, either big or small. And about 50% is through different programs that people opt into. So actually funding is quite a large, funding through kind of grants is quite a large part of what we kind of do and to support us financially.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So the topic of your charity, the theme of your charity, is that sustainability and in trying to embed that throughout the learning journey?
Yeah, so we're an educational charity focusing specifically on sustainability.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Kind of informal curriculum.
Okay, and then Naomi Lynch from the Active Wellbeing Society.
Hiya, I'm Naomi. I'm the Funding and Strategy Manager at the Active Wellbeing Society, which is a community benefit society and cooperative based in Birmingham. We spun out of Birmingham City Council a few years ago, but we are increasingly working in different parts of the country. Our main focus is on community well-being, which is incredibly broad and includes for us the kind of 5 ways to well-being as they've traditionally been of like connecting and volunteering and being active and mindfulness and mental health, but increasingly kind of the 6th way of well-being, which is climate and the world and the environment around us. Our focus on kind of sustainability has for a long time been on been kind of, I guess, the whole co-benefit stuff of we are working to tackle inequality and poverty and improve health and well-being, and that's brought us into working increasingly on active travel initiatives and particularly recently on initiatives around food and sustainability, which do with food, and that's taking us more and more into climate conversations. So it's quite a new area for me, but it's something of interest to us.
Thank you.
Okay, and then Nick Mason from Guru Systems.
Morning. Guru Systems focuses on delivering low carbon heat with a specific focus on heat networks. So we manufacture hardware and we design or develop our own software to both help residents manage the heat inside their homes and payment for the heat. And also, more interestingly, we have network performance management software platforms. So that's the focus of our company. We're actually running an Innovate UK and a Bayes grant at the moment, and we just finished another Innovate UK grant. So we're relatively successful on the funding front. However, what I'm keen to get out, hopefully from this session, is grants outside the UK. So we're looking to use the grant strategy to take us from the UK into Europe, whether that's Eurostars or whatever is out there at the moment. So I'm keen to pick that up. Personally, I also do grant assessments for Climate Kick for some of their programs as well. So it'd be interesting to listen to your success and then compare that to the various experiences I've had over the past couple of years. Thanks.
Excellent. If I get lost, you can take over.
No.
And then Rachel Warren.
Morning all, yes, my name is Rachel. I work at Nottingham City Council. I'm the ULEV and Commercial Projects Manager, and I sit within the Innovation and Change team, which is part of Parking, Fleet and Transport Services. In the past and also at the moment working with other local authorities, I've worked on the Workplace Parking Levy in Nottingham, which is why I'm here. We won an Ashden Award back in 2017 for that initiative. My team work on a broad range of projects across parking, fleet and transport. And Nottingham City Council as a local authority are at the forefront really of local authority climate conversation. We're aiming to be the first carbon neutral city in the UK by 2028. We have received recently a number of grant funding from the Transforming Cities Fund, Highways England, but really why I'm here today is just to really explore what other options could be available to us, and really the tips for success in applying for those, as to how we can fund the initiatives that we are working on as a team. So really just more of a general approach today, just to listen and learn.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. And then just finally, Rachel also from SOS, if you just want to quickly say hello.
Hi, yeah, I'm Rachel from SOS UK, working with Joanna, and I'm just starting to get into some of our grant application writing. So this is all quite new to me, but interested to be here.
Good, nice to have you here. Excellent. So thank you for that. It seems like there is plenty of opportunity, and it's quite a nice mix here with charity, local council, and maybe innovation-led SMEs. So that will play quite nicely into partnering and so on. We talk about that a bit further on. Okay, so again, feel free to jump in, just cough or something, and if I miss it, I'm sure Cara will help me pick up any questions. These are broadly the kind of organizations that we're working with. Just to give you a couple of examples, we recently worked with a fintech company who are looking to help and support more vulnerable members of society with access to mainstream financial services, and where you don't always see fintech as potentially having a positive impact. Here is one that was doing a good thing, launching a good project. So that kind of innovation-led disruptive technology business, similar to an e-cargo bikes or Guru, who are providing that low carbon heat, will qualify quite neatly for R&D grant funding, and grants in general, actually. And then in the middle there, we're doing quite a lot of work with under a smart city banner, if you like, or it's kind of moving now towards smart region, smart country. And this can include multiple applicants that form a consortium. And I think this is where certainly local authorities and charities can access R&D funding. In fact, it would be a desire and a requirement sometimes to come together in a collaboration to access that funding. So one of the most recent ones we went for was a open data platform to share information across EU cities and actually worldwide. It is an EU fund, which hence the focus on EU. But looking at creating a shared data space, an open data space, that applications for parking and fleet management and mobility and air pollution and city planning and so on could be built on top of. And then finally, there are more and more CICs and charities who are innovation-led, and again, they form a nice part of a grant application as a consortium member. We're doing some work with Sunex, who are looking to bring through the next generation of carbon leaders, if you like, low carbon leaders in the travel and tourism sector. And we're helping them to access some funding that they might not otherwise have been able to get hold of. So a quick overview then of the types of funding that you might look to access versus the type of organization you are. I won't run through this word for word, but we've written an ebook which is available to download on the website, and this is just a table extracted from the exec summary of that book, so you can read all about those different types of funding and get more links if you're interested to explore a bit more. And obviously this table helps you jump to the right section at the right time. Our focus is more on grants this morning, and just to give you a headline, these are the different types of grants, roughly speaking, that you can get hold of. We will focus mainly on research and innovation today, but there has been a couple of people who have said that potentially business growth and knowledge exchange and to maybe a lesser extent business support grants would also be interesting. Certainly if you can tap into that knowledge exchange program, if the SOS people in the room, potentially you could scale what you're doing with that kind of funding, and that is all about taking what you're doing, developing more content, and preparing to scale that knowledge share. On the business growth grant side, and I would broaden that to say that it's economic growth as well. So sometimes grant funding is allocated to certain regions and areas that are potentially performing less well from an economic standpoint, or other indicators at government level, and then support in the form of grants can be offered for, well, sometimes certainly for generation of low carbon heat electricity, and monitoring that. So again, there might be opportunities to tap into grants as part of a refurb or a construction project. Business support grants you can pick up here and there, kind of a few £1,000s to help with the cost of patenting an idea or market research, or some equipment. And again, they're very regional, and a lot of them have come historically from European ERDF or ESF funds, and it will be interesting to see what the government do starting in January to replace that, or to somehow remain part of that. So broadly speaking, you can see the difference between those grants, particularly the two at the top, in what would be funded. So the business growth grants are more about assets, buildings and machines and equipment, and the R&D grants are more about staff and creating new products, processes and services. I skipped this slide. So looking at research and development grants, which is really what we're here to talk about in the main, there is a process. The first three boxes there show a process that you can move through at that very early proof of concept stage. That kind of idea, the spark, the requirement for funding is to understand the market, the technology in a bit more detail, a roadmap for how you can progress through prototyping and scaling to market launch of that new product, process or service. The grant funders will be quite comfortable with what they call a TRL level, a technology readiness level. It was a concept borrowed from NASA when they were first developing space rockets, spaceships, and international space stations and so on. So that TRL 1 to 4, and the scale runs from 1 to 9. 1 to 4 is early stage, and it might help you if you're reading about the guidance of a fund. If they're talking about TRL 1 to 4 or somewhere between 1 and 6, then you can see that you're in this reasonably early stage. If you've already got your prototype and it's ready, and really what you're looking for is to miniaturize and test, or finalize it, put it into a product and prepare for scaling, then you need to be looking at grants that are further down this technology readiness scale. Just to give you a quick example of so there's a European fund called the EIC Accelerator that offers a €50,000 grant for proof of concept, and then a €2.5 million grant for prototyping and scaling, and then further support and mentoring and access to market at a later stage once you've got your product ready to go. And that would be similar for Innovate UK. They have, not officially, but broadly speaking, up to £100,000, £150,000 for that early stage concept. And then anything from 100,000 to, well, they will fund as much as 2 million, but I think that's unlikely at that prototyping and scaling stage. So Innovate UK are the main provider of R&D grants in the UK. They have open calls, which, as the title would suggest, are fairly broad in their scope and range, and attract, therefore, a high number of applications and tend to be quite competitive. Then they have specific calls under certain themes that they are keen to support that are listed there for you. And these tend to be overall there's more requirements to be eligible to qualify for those grants, but therefore the number of applicants applying into one of their specific calls drops, and if you can qualify and if you have a relevant project, then there is therefore a higher chance of success. The open calls are run roughly every quarter. There's been a bit of a disruption with Corona because there's been funding allocated specifically to Corona-related challenges. But generally speaking, every quarter there'll be an open call, and at any one time there's somewhere between 10 and 20 specific calls open and accepting applications for funding. You need to hit the deadline, otherwise you will not be considered. There's no excuses for being late. It's an online submission. Generally speaking, Innovate UK will take 6 to 8 weeks to give you a decision, and then there's normally about a month or so of paperwork and compliance and assigning a project officer before you can actually kick the project off. There's good support from Innovate UK. They're quite transparent compared with a number of operators, other grant funders that we know, and they're hosting events. They've got good webinars. Wait and see if the physical events are still coming. The information provided with each fund is good from their website, and there's a link at the bottom of this slide actually once Cara shares slides to find Innovate UK. We're not only limited to Innovate UK, there are other sources of funding, and organisations like Nesta are particularly interested in innovative and good projects, so they're worth having a look, and any grant search engine will provide you with some more opportunities to find funding outside of Innovate UK. What is nice about Innovate UK is they have streamlined the application process. It's a hard application to win, but the guidance and the submission process is reasonably straightforward. The decision time is reasonably quick. They've been doing this a long time, and you're in relatively safe hands when you're interacting with them. One of the key elements of Innovate UK is eligibility. So any call will need to have an innovation-led small medium-sized enterprise as part of the team that is applying. Now, you can apply alone, or you can add partners to your consortium and apply as a group. So we could, thinking about people in the room, I could see a collaboration between, say, the e-bike organisation, a local authority that's interested in improving or reducing carbon emissions within the city, and potentially a research institution that might be involved in the project to benchmark and then track the impact of the project over a 12 or 18-month period. If the organisation creating that cargo bike, or maybe potentially a new type of bike to be suitable for urban city use, needs some funding for research and development to prototype or test a new concept or develop certain software for managing the bikes, be that hiring it or running it or billing for it. And then the city would need some funding to test some infrastructure, install them, or consult and support the e-bike company in how this scheme might work and setting it up and testing it. And then the research institution might be a university in the city, would get involved into saying, well, it could be helping in the research and development of e-bikes, if it's kind of core battery technology that is a skill at that research center, or it could be, like I say, the independent monitoring and reporting on actually what impact has this had, and is it worth scaling, and if so, how could we scale it? That kind of approach, that innovative SME, a industry partner, in this case the city, to say, yeah, we're backing this SME, we want to test the technology, and we are the perfect organization to test this, and then a research institution to bring that trust and evaluation element. That will be a really strong collaboration to go after any R&D grants, but particularly Innovate UK. In Europe, they have a helix of kind of 4 stakeholders together. I tried to find the image, but I couldn't find one that was clean enough to use as a on a slide. But they talk about wanting to see every grant application representing business, so in this case, potentially the SME, industry, so where once this new product, process or service has been developed and tested, where can it be deployed, and how can it be scaled? So maybe that city partner or a manufacturing partner. Then they want to see research, so universities or research centers. So in that sense, those 3 partners are what we spoke about. Then they add a 4th one, which is interesting, particularly with the NUS Educational Charity or potentially the Wellbeing Society, where they add society as the 4th, or the citizen as the 4th part of that quadruple helix. And there they're talking about, how is your product, process or service genuinely in demand? Is it doing good? Is this something that society needs? And do you have some evidence to suggest they do need it? And the best kind of evidence would be to have an educational charity or society that represents the citizen in that case, and could be part of that project to make sure it delivers on what is being promised. And again, funding can be allocated over the period of 12 or 36 months, depending on the project that you're specifying, to support all of those 4 entities coming together. I've spoken quite a bit, so hopefully that all makes sense. Does anyone have questions at this stage? So a nice bright slide to wake you up, and some tips. So as the title would suggest, innovation grant funding or R&D grant funding is all about innovative new approaches, and ultimately the funder wants to see a few years down the line that there is a new product, process or service that has been developed, tested, ideally tested in a real life situation, and then launched. One of the critical success factors, therefore, is demonstrating innovation. And the way we've approached this in the past is to create a specific table which lists features and benefits, and hopefully quantified benefits. So to the grant writer in the room, sorry, whose name I've forgotten, to construct that table, you will need some help of people in your organization who can say, look, in comparison to either competing businesses or competing methodologies. So it might not be a business, but it might be, some people do this process that we're trying to improve manually. Some people do it part automated, some people do it fully automated, and we're looking at doing it fully automated with intelligence. So you can list some features you can that might be in demand from customers, market research. You can list some benefits that each of those features would bring, and ideally you could quantify the benefits. So if the benefit is a time saving or a cost saving or a reduction in GHG emissions or an improvement in air quality or a reduction in congestion, however you're measuring that, then this is the place to capture that. What are you delivering in a quantified way? It doesn't have to be lots. People get excited about USPs and they list 10 USPs. You only need one if it's a good one. 2 or 3 is absolutely fine. But that table that you can often include in an annex supporting, you can make the centerpiece of your why is this application innovative.
Alex, could I just ask a question? What about sort of social benefits, as sort of that might be less kind of tangible, less easy to quantify?
Yeah, so there is generally, well, in every R&D application I've ever written, there is a whole section dedicated to wider impacts. And I would urge you to try and quantify, even if it's quite broad and there's a range. But it's entirely reasonable in that wider benefits section to take policies, maybe at governmental or international levels, that say, this is what we're aiming for on for example, European Green Deal level or Paris 2050 level, and then to say our innovation will make a positive contribution to this target, whether that's climate or education, knowledge, your low carbon heat people will probably have an easier time quantifying than potentially the impact of getting sustainability through the journey of university journey of students. But quantify where you can, and don't be afraid just to make a broad statement if it's linked to a policy. And then I would suggest to say, we would like to quantify this, measure the impact, and part of the funding that we're applying for will be used to report back on the impact that we've had. Is that okay, Karen? So the second most important element of an R&D application is commercial potential. So there needs to be something novel, innovative on the one hand, but there needs to be a realistic chance that you can make this work commercially. And by commercially, that doesn't mean you need to create a unicorn or in fact a zebra. You can look at how you would make this new product, process or service sustainable. So it would ideally need to generate some income to be able to employ people and scale services and not rely on grant funding in the medium and long term. But at the early stage, you need some grant funding to overcome those technical challenges. So I think the best way to approach this is to define a target market and an addressable market within that target market, and be quite specific about the users, their characteristics, the barriers to that market, how you're going to overcome those barriers to entry. And this is why it's particularly useful to have an industry partner on board, because it's a great start to say, look, we've got Nottingham City Council, who are particularly interested in parking and mobility and reducing carbon emissions, and they are backing our project to bring e-bikes or e-cargo bikes into the city, and so much so they're part of the project. That demonstrates there is a demand in the market, and you've already got potentially your first customer and case study, and it gives you a nice platform to launch from there. So we have never failed to get an innovation, an R&D grant approved if the team section has scored 90 or 100%. It really is critical. It's like any kind of similar to equity investment. If the assessors believe in the team, then that goes a long way to convincing them to give you the funding. So in annexes, I would provide a full CV. You know, it doesn't need to be longer than a page, and it can be half a page if you want, but I would urge some effort into making those team CVs look good. Don't just give a link to LinkedIn and hope that the advisor will have the time to go through and pick through that. The team needs to be balanced. So you're going to, for R&D grants, ideally need someone technical, someone commercial, someone financial, and then if you've got partners on board, maybe a professor from the university, or maybe a head of department from the council, or the CEO of your industry partner. I think at least 3 or 4 team members, and as many as 10 if you have a larger consortium. The other thing that you can do, especially if you're a relatively young business or organization, you're not so established, is you can consider pulling together an advisory board and giving the bios or CVs of an advisory board rather than people who are employed by you or part of your team. I think, if you are looking to launch something new, people will generally support you. If you're doing a good thing and you can access good people. I mean, maybe Ashden as well might say, look, we've got some experts that would be happy to take a virtual seat on an advisory board, and here's a CV or a bio of someone who could do that. That adds strength where you don't need to necessarily employ 20 people who make your company look outstanding. If you are missing someone, so maybe you've got the CEO and the CTO in place, but there is a gap on the commercial side or a gap on the research side, then it's entirely reasonable to acknowledge that gap in an application. And in that case, it's worth putting into the team section the skill set of the person you are looking to recruit, and to say, once we get the funding, this is the skill set we're looking for, and give them a headline plan of how you intend to recruit for that person. So is it someone you already know or have in mind? Have you already had initial conversations with a few people? Is it someone that, will you work with a recruitment consultant in the first month as soon as you've been awarded the funding, who can bring that person on board? So are there any questions on those 3 tips?
Just with regards to that team, the last point you're making about hiring, is it seen as a bonus to effectively be supporting hiring? So it's not so much necessarily, I mean, we sort of highlight the fact that if we get this grant, we can expand our team, therefore you're helping us grow as a company kind of approach.
Yeah, it's absolutely a good point. And so there are a whole plethora of things that funders will look for. And one of those is if your team is growing, if you're planning financial growth over a 5-year period. So yes, if you're saying on award of the funding, we would look to recruit XYZ positions, I would say make an optimistic statement that beyond the period of the grant funding, you would look to retain them on full-time contracts, and that would add some weight. The truth is, with R&D grants, there is little recourse beyond the project. So during the project, you need to give quarterly, depending on the funder, but in the main quarterly reports to a project officer. But by the end of the project, you put in your final report, you get in your final chunk of grant funding. They're interested to talk to you and see how you grow and monitor you, and to justify their initial decision and future funding for Innovate UK or so on. But if you don't manage to retain all the staff that you were hoping to retain, there is no penalty there. So you can be optimistic about retaining staff.
Alex, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I've only done 1 grant application so far. So I'm a mere novice. So this is all really great stuff for me. Typically, are there very extreme word limits on how many words you can write in grant funding? Because the only one we did was a UK Innovate one as a response to COVID. And the number of words or even digits per box you could enter was 250 to 450 or something like that. Is that typical? Because the team section was also very light on words. So perhaps we were naive and didn't put a annex in, but you really couldn't, there wasn't really much wriggle room or elbow room to kind of get the message across. Yeah,
so your experience is normal. So with Innovate UK, they have 10 core questions, roughly. It might be as many as 13 or 14 if it's a specific call, but each question must be answered within 400 words, which is not a huge amount of text when you're trying to convey what could be quite a complex project and an ambition. There are annexes that you can submit. One is a technical annex. So in there you can include diagrams and tables and so on. With Innovate, generally that is 2 sides of A4. There is a team annex where you can, you have up to 4 pages, and that's where you can include your team CVs or bios and a bit about your company. Oh, and I'd suggest including an org chart to show, even if there isn't hierarchy within your organization, kind of shows a structure of decision making, or if you encounter over your 12-month projects some challenges, then how are you going to manage those? You can show that in the annex. And then there's a project plan annex, so a Gantt chart and a list of tasks that you're going to deliver, who's responsible, when you're going to deliver what. So that kind of practical project plan. Again, you can have 2 pages in there, and I think a Gantt chart is really worth looking at. Even if it's relatively simple, the assessors like it. And then finally, there's a risk assessment, so a risk table annex, which again is 2 sides and can support your answer of 400 words. So there is not a huge amount of space. That said, it can be a blessing because, for example, we worked on a European call with the deadline last week, and here they set a 70-page limit on the actual application, and then they gave you unlimited pages for the annexes. So our annexes ended up being over 100 pages long, and the application 70 pages long, which, as you can think, it's a huge amount of work and effort. It looked great in the end, but I do sometimes wonder whether 5,000 words plus 4 annexes is enough to award funding. So yeah, it can be a friend and an enemy.
Thank you.
Alex, is it also fair to say that because Innovate UK is only 13 questions normally, once you've got your structure in place, then doing the next one actually becomes quite a lot easier. So Innovate UK, you can sort of learn and go forward from application to application, whereas some of the other ones seem to be all over the place.
Yeah, I think that, again, it comes back to how accessible Innovate UK is in comparison to other funding sources or grant funding sources. They have deliberately stuck to a similar format. And if you are unsuccessful, you do get feedback, and the feedback tends to be quite good. Not only do you get a score out of 10 for each question, those 10 core questions, you also get feedback from each of the 3 or sometimes 5 assessors as to what they think could be strengthened and potentially how. So you've got an opportunity to resubmit if you're not successful the first time. And over a period of years, you can improve your kind of stock answers to all those questions. For example, there's always a few lines that you need to put in about IP protection, and that doesn't need to change dramatically from application to application. Once you've got a good score for IP, it's relatively easy to, I wouldn't say copy and paste, but certainly use a good chunk of that information in the following applications. I mean, in January they'll change it all, so all that learning will go somehow, but hopefully not. Hopefully they stick to the process that they've got. It seems well defined, and it's working well for most applicants.
Hi Alex, I'm just seeing it's just coming up for 11 o'clock now. So should we break and then resume on Thursday morning?
Yes, I think that would make sense. I've got a few more tips. I can also try and work in a few of the elements for the next session based on now I know who's here, and also include a bit on EU funding for the next session. And I guess if anyone has anything particular that they'd like covered, is it okay if they email you, Cara, and I can just work on a few of the slides tomorrow before we reconvene on Thursday?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, please do that.